house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, it's Ian, and it's time for another episode of Native Film Talk. And today we're going to talk about episode 7, season 1. Jeez, come on, Ian. Season 1, episode 7 of Reservation Dogs. This, man, talk about a powerful, tear-jerking episode, one of those love-hate relationship kind of things you have with an episode where it's like, God, that was such a good episode, but I don't know if I can watch it again. And it was tough. This was a tough watch for me, but overall, I'm so happy this show exists. I'm so happy that this episode exists, and I'll get into more reasons about that. You know, we'll talk about the show. We'll talk about the episode, what's transpired thus far in the show. This is really the Elora Dannon episode. So this is the last of the 4 episodes dedicated to the Res Dogs. We had Bear's episode, Cheese. We had another one on Willie Jack. And now we have Elora's episode. And then the next episode, Saturday, is the last episode of the season. And then I'll be done for now on Res Dogs. You know, I halfway through this, I'm like, God, why did I do this? Why did I dedicate so much time to Res Dogs? But you know, now I'm just glad that it happened, and I'm glad that we're almost home, and I'm really happy that this show exists, and I can't wait for season 2. And they're writing season 2 right now. You know, the Res Dogs writers are in the writers' room right now working on it, and I'm so excited to see what they come up with, because what they've come up with so far has just been nothing short of like groundbreaking and amazing to see. So let's get into it. Season 7, California Dreamin', directed by Tazba Chavez, written by Tazba Chavez. So real quick synopsis. You know, this is where Elora takes her driver's test, and it's very clear that she's failed multiple times before. She needs this to get out of Dodge. She needs this to get to California. She needs her driver's license. And instead, we get taken on a wild ride where we're met with Bill Burr, coach. And I thought that was a really great addition, really great surprise. I'm a massive, massive Bill Burr fan. Hands down my favorite comedian. And anytime he comes anywhere near me, I go see him, whether it's in New Mexico, Arizona, Vegas. I love seeing Bill Burr. He's hands down my favorite comedian. Like I said, diehard listener to his Monday morning podcast. What's interesting is I remember, I want to say last year, he was filming this show, and he was talking about having an Indian taco. And Sterling Harjo, in one of his podcast episodes, said that he gave, I think it was in Mark Maron's podcast, he gave Bill Burr an Indian taco. Might have been in Tiger Belly, actually. But I remember Bill Burr was talking about it in his Monday morning podcast, and he was saying, oh, man, that thing sits. He was basically saying, like, it's a gut sticker. Like, that's one of those things that's going to stay with you. Like, for a white guy white German-Irish guy who never had an Indian taco in his life, never had fry bread in his life. Maybe he had, but to have an Indian taco, he was just like, man, that sits heavy in your stomach. I think he was just amazed that like that's what we eat all the time, but also just like that's like how different it is in terms of cuisine and taste from what he's used to. And it sounded like he liked it. You know, he powered through it out of respect for Sterling and everyone that gave it to him, but it definitely wasn't for him. He's got different taste buds being a German-Irish white guy. But I couldn't believe Bill Burr was in this. He plays Coach Garrett Baskin. Sorry, for some reason thought of Carol Baskin. I mean Coach Garrett Bobson, a.k.a. Chokaji, a.k.a. Elora's driving instructor. And that's where we get introduced to him in this episode. And yeah, so let's just jump right into it. I mean, Bill Burr, he's been a comedian since the early 90s. He's been around for a long time in movies and random things like Stand-Up Guys, and he was in Heat, the Sandra Bullock movie. He's been in like random cameos, and his career has really picked up steam ever since really Breaking Bad, when he played Tubi? When he played Tubi alongside Lavelle Crawford, and as like a couple of henchmen that Saul Goodman had hired. So ever since his, Vince Gilligan days when he had got brought on to Breaking Bad. He's gotten more and more higher profile roles up until recently. Now he was in The Mandalorian. I loved him as a bounty hunter in The Mandalorian and now in Reservation Dogs. And according to what I've heard, Sterling Harjo was a guest on Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast, which is rare. Bill Burr hates scheduling. He hates coordinating interviews on his show. So it was a big deal for him to invite Sterling Harjo on his show, and I think that just shows his admiration for this show, admiration for the native people, and he gushed about how that set was just different. Like, it was a very community feel, and it was just a different set than he's been on before. And this is coming from a guy that's been on Mandalorian, he worked on Breaking Bad, and he's been on big box office movies, big box office, but he's been in high production, high dollar movies, like he was in The King of Staten Island, Pete Davidson film, and so he's done a lot of stuff. He worked alongside Sandra Bullock. So for him to say to Sterling, like, what you're doing over there is special, and what you're doing over there is awesome, and I hope I can be a part of it again. And Sterling was like, oh yeah, we'll definitely bring you back. And I think Sterling, massive stand-up comedian fan, stand-up fan. That's why he brought in Bobby Lee. That's why he brought in Kirk Fox. That's why he brought in Bill Burr. Like, he's a massive stand-up fan. He talks about being in LA and going to the Comedy Store and seeing all these guys go up and do their work on their content, work on their material, and work through stuff. And I think he just has such admiration for these people, and he's trying to cultivate an environment where it makes them want to come back, where it makes them go on other podcasts and talk about how awesome it is to be working on Reservation Dogs. And I think that's what makes me most excited about this show, is something like Reservation Dogs would be done, I think has been done in the past. At the top of my head, I can't think of it, where it's like insider stuff, where it's like clearly done and made for natives by natives, but it like never leaves the res, or it never gets outside of like that community, and it sure as hell never attracts people like Bobby Lee and Bill Burr and Kirk Fox. And have an executive producer be Taika Waititi. And I think that's what's amazing about this show, is it's attracting so much talent, and I think there's so much buzz going on around what it's like on set, around how much better the Res Dog sets treats people, especially with all of these strikes, potential strikes, and people petitioning to walk off sets because of really like shit conditions of how like people that actually make the movies are treated, outside of the actors, outside of like the high dollar paid people, like how those people are treated, how it's like a caste system almost, where it's like you're an untouchable if you're not an actor, or if you're not a stunt coordinator, or if you're not like a higher profile like person in leadership. It's like it's kind of gross. And Sterling was just like, fuck that. Like, I've been on movie sets where people have been treated less than human, and people have been treated like garbage, and that's not how it's going to be on my set. We're here in my community in Oklahoma. All these people here are my family. They're people I grew up around. You guys are all visitors. Everyone here that's coming on set, it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire or you are a marquee name in Hollywood. When you come here to Oklahoma, you're a guest. And these people are the people that are from here. So you treat them with respect. You treat everyone here as though you are the visitor, And I really think that particular mindset with making a television show, I think is going to garner more interest. And when season 2 comes along, I can't wait to see who's going to be brought on board, because it's going to be freaking amazing. So let's jump right into it. I took a little bit longer to just like talk about and open with this one, but just shows how excited I am about this. Let's open. So, plot review, positives, negatives, and then final thoughts to bring us home. So this was a heavy episode. This opens when back to the gang, when Daniel was still alive. They were the four walking down an alley, and basically a year ago, they were all about to hang out. This is the day that Daniel kills himself. This is the day that Daniel is like, committing suicide. So we start to get a little bit of a glimpse into who Daniel is in the Willie Jack episode. He's a little impulsive. He definitely has some mental health struggles that he's working through, but we don't really understand why. And so them walking down the alley, and they all start to part ways, about to go home for dinner. We see everyone glance over to Daniel's house, and there's some tussling going on. There's physical fighting, and it seems like this is a regular thing based on the way everybody reacts to it, where it's just like, oh, fuck, here we go again kind of thing. And Elora distracts him and says like, hey, let's go for a walk. Elora likes Daniel. Elora really looks out for him, and Elora understands how much pain that he's in, and she really cares for people genuinely, and that sentiment is reiterated by Bill Burr's character Coach later on in the episode, of just like, you get your caring heart from your mother. And she looks out for Daniel in this episode. It's like, let's go for a walk, you don't got to go home, let's don't worry about all this. Everyone else can't hang out, so Elora and Daniel go and take off. And then we go back to so something really funny before we go. Daniel or Bear was like, I gotta go home, we're gonna have dinner. And Cheese says, you own a dinner table? And Willie Jack says, yeah, there's usually clothes on it. Oh man, such is life. It's a great if you know thing. So that's a super native insider joke. Either get it or you don't. But they get it, they part ways, and then it's just Elora and Daniel rolling together. And then we connect to current day. We flash back to current day. There's a lot of jumping back and forth with the timeline. So we jump to current day, and Elora's trying to get her driver's license. She's failed like 3 times before, gotten tickets with a driving permit, and had it revoked. And the driving, the admin up front is just like, you failed 3 times already. I doesn't have any confidence that she's going to pass. And Elora's just like, 4 is a sacred number. It's just a great one-liner. And so she walks out to go meet her driving instructor, and old Billy Redface is her driving instructor. They have history together. Coach Burr, actually it's Coach Bobson, used to be her basketball coach. It sounds like Elora dropped out of high school. She had to go to work, start hustling, stealing stuff to get by. So they had to get past the pleasantries. They start the driving test. Coach gets in, sees her res ride, and there's just trash all over the floor. This is a res ride. We saw this in Uncle Brownie because this is the vehicle they were driving, but it's just like you don't even have a rear view mirror. Of course she has it, but it's in the glove compartment. And there's a great sequence of her like to prep for the driving test of like, oh yeah, I have that. She puts it up. She puts duct tape on the rear view mirror to put it back in place. And Coach is like, I don't even know how to mark that. And it's wonderful. It's just a res ride, a res ride, redneck ride, whatever you want to call it. Baling wire, duct tape, hay string, holding stuff together. It's not a res ride if it's not held together by hopes and dreams. And I'm so happy they showed this vehicle because have the dirty ass windshield with no wiper fluid. I mean, that's kind of what natives do, is just drive until the wheels fall off. And then the driving test begins. The ride is dirty, it's trash all over. She's like, I'm going to California. And Coach is like, what, in this car? Horseshit. It won't make it to Tulsa. And at this point in the plot, we're like, okay, it's clear that Coach knows Elora and her family. He asks about her grandma while they're taking the test. And I'm going to kind of blaze through the parts of the plot that don't really have native representation like I typically do. But Elora clearly needs to pass this thing because she needs this driver's license to get out of town. She can't leave to California legally until she actually gets her license. And she knows that if she probably can't get a job in California, there's a lot of things like this is a gateway that she needs to get through to actually succeed in the life that she wants to have outside of this town. And they try to parallel park, and then during this parallel park fiasco, Coach gets a call, and we get a glimpse into Coach Bobson's life. His daughter is a drug addict. She's on the run. He gets a call from somebody that has a tip about where his daughter might be. So he's like, hold on, we got to switch spots. You're not doing good so far, but we're going to fucking just put this thing on pause. And he just drives to a motel. And they get to, as they're taking off to the motel, flashback to Elora and Daniel. They are, just left the gang. It's just those two. They go to this bar that they know they won't get carded. So I'm going to assume that they're drinking. They never show it. They never talk about it. They never mention drugs, drinking. They never even show a bottle in front of them. But I'm going to assume they had some drinks because they specifically said, hey, we can go in because we're not going to get carded. I don't know if that just means they got in and they're just hanging out. I'm not sure. But it's not even shown. I love that they didn't delve into it because, honestly, I thought this was going to be, oh no, here we go again. Drunken Indians getting kicked out of a bar. Or someone was going to say some racist shit to the kids while they were drinking or having a beer. But no, none of these things happen. It's not this show. That's not what this show is about. They're not going to portray that. A show run by non-natives, they would have loved to lean into that damaged plot line. Daniel blowing up in the alley, just getting after he gets kicked out of the bar or has some racist shit said to him by some non-natives, and he talks about, oh, it just sucks to live here, and I wondered, and then laments about why his parents are always drinking and fighting, and Elora talking about why her family's all messed up too and died from drinking in a car crash, wallowing in their alcoholic sorrows. And not this show. This show acknowledges that it's a part of our narrative, it's a part of our community, but it's such a small piece that unfortunately gets latched onto by outsiders and that assume that that's a much bigger piece of who we are. And, like I said, you don't even know for sure if they had a drink, but, they start out just two-stepping, and then eventually it gets to like Elora wants to bounce, and Daniel gets belligerent and blows up. He gets really emotional, like when he was hunting with Leon and Willie Jack, and then blows up, ends up walks out of the bar. Elora's like, hey, what's up? Let's and he's just like, hey, I'm done for the night. Let's bounce, And before they part ways, Daniel asks Elora, would you ever go to California with me? She's like, California? Yeah, I've always wanted to go. And she kind of pauses for a minute and says, yeah, I'll go to California with you. She likes him. She cares about him. She wants to go with him. And this is where it all began. Elora's the leader and calls the shots. That's why the kids want to leave town. That's why they're so adamant about getting money. That's why Elora is more driven than anyone else in the group. And it was all because of just this interaction, because that's the last time that she sees him alive. That anybody, well, not anybody, because after this in the timeline, Daniel, on his way back to the hideout, stops at Leon's place when he was loading up the bags of feed, because the next day he gets visited by Tall Man as he's putting the feed out at their hunting site. And so flashback to Elora, in the motel, waiting for Coach in the car. He's got a freaking little revolver in his boot. He breaks that thing out after he sees his daughter go into a room, and a shootout ensues. She's the getaway car driver. They take off, and now she's got one of her taillights shot out. The driver's test is not going well at all. And this next scene, Bill Burr, Coach, and Elora are sitting there in the car, and they have an interaction that I didn't expect that I wanted, but I really enjoyed it, because they showed drug addiction and they showed really how fucked up this town is, but they didn't focus on natives. They showed a white person. They showed how it's not only Indians that are addicts. It's not only Indians that are affected by this stuff. Like the environment is what's toxic. And unfortunately, the environment is where we were put. The environment is where we inhabit, not by choice. It's just where we are. And a lot of times it's so suffocating that we can't leave. And I don't like that that's not talked about enough, but this show addresses, because Bill Burr says that, she's just a victim of circumstance, it sounds like. He seems like a great dad, or at least a dad that really tried. He laments to her and he says, I taught her how to walk. I taught her how to swim. I taught her how to talk. Taught her everything, and he says, these little humans you've been keeping alive all these years go running around with the wrong crowd. I couldn't stop it. It was like a train. Methamphetamines, opioids. Worried she might be dead. All of a sudden, this little girl that he raised that Elora knew, her name was Ashley. Elora knew her. What happened to Ashley? She asked the coach, and what got him going off and talking about, I don't know what happened. That's what happens in Indian country sometimes. It's so unfortunate that in a community like this, sometimes all it takes is hanging out with the wrong person one night when you shouldn't have got in the car when you actually did, or you shouldn't have kept talking to that person when you did, or you just started rolling with the wrong people and shit happens. And in a community like this where it's so unstable, your foundation of success hinges on a foundation that's not as stable as it would be elsewhere, that kind of thing can just crack, and then that's it, and you end up like Ashley, or you end up like Daniel. And I really like how this show talks about it but doesn't talk about it. Like, it's one of those things that if you know, you know, but I think it's subtly telling you that it's not just an Indian problem, it's an everybody problem. And now that we moved on from the crack in the 80s and 90s when it was a color issue, when they were talking about how it was only in black communities, to now where it's opioids, where it's affecting poor white people instead of poor black people, and poor minorities, poor black and brown people. Now it's a problem that's worth addressing to the larger, audience. Now it's a problem when it was only a black and brown problem earlier. But now that it's affecting basically non-natives, white people, it's a bigger issue. And I like how that this is being addressed, because it is an issue everywhere. So to avoid getting in trouble, Elora's like, I got you, coach. You said you're going to lose your job. I don't think so. I know a place where we can get this taillight fixed. I won't say anything. You can trust me. So they go see Kenny Boy. And Kenny Boy knows Coach. And I like that when they pull up to the junkyard, salvage yard, Kenny Boy and Coach, they know each other. And then Elora gets out of the car, and Kenny Boy goes, Yate, Elora Dannon. Or Yate, Elora Dannon. That's hello in Dene. I mean, it actually means it is good, but I go with hello. Kenny Boy is like one of my favorite one-liners. Like, he's just a great character. His really loose choker that he wears, his random native knowledge. He's just so... It's very clear that natives wrote this. And I think that... God, I love Kirk Fox's character, Kenny Boy. He's so perfect. And they both just say different things. What I thought was cool was... Because Coach, at this point, he's just like, I know Kenny Boy. He's like, how do you know Kenny Boy? And Kenny Boy says, oh, they stole a chip truck from me. And Elora's like, oh, I used to, we're co-workers. And Coach just, like, laughs and, like, sticks his head down. He's just like... okay, whatever. And then he looks at Kenny Boy and he says, oh, crazy Kenny, I always said you could make it as a stand-up comedian. And what's cool is Kenny Boy says, too many joke thieves out there. I'm not going to do that. So for those of you that don't know that, Kirk Fox is a stand-up comedian, along with Bill Burr. And Kirk Fox, so ResDog's Twitter page, they had this 4 or 5 second loop of Bill Burr saying, oh, crazy Kenny, I always said you could make it as a stand-up comedian, and then having him say, oh, too many joke thieves out there. And Kirk Fox retweeted it and said on his Twitter, comedy's cool, but there's more money in meth, cockfighting, salvage, and walking in beauty. Oh, man, I hope they bring back Kenny Boy. I hope they bring back Coach's character. Like, these comedians are next level with their stuff, and I love how they lean into it, and they take the content, and they just adopt it. So after this interaction, they're just sitting around waiting. And this is where Elora texts Bear. And she's like, hey, we should hang out later. My car's going to get fixed. But Bear and the gang are like, no, I'm going to pass till tomorrow. And then she looks at that text again from Jackie that says, yo, it's Jackie, what up? Because if you remember, Jackie said, you should ditch these kids and just, come roll with us. And so I think something that's cool is I pieced together a little bit of the timeline. I paused the text because they bring up a screenshot basically of her text, almost like a stream, and she has all these different texts from people, but the text from Jackie says it was from 2 days prior. So 2 days prior, when Pumpkin didn't show up and they were watching the Godzilla movie, that's when she got the text. And 2 days later, she's trying to get her license. So it can be assumed, based on how quick these things are happening, this entire season takes place in the span of like no more than a week or two in real time. And given that the next episode is called Saturday, I would assume this is like a Monday through Sunday thing. Like this is probably just like a week in time. Like this does not take a whole lot. This does not happen over a long period of time. That's what I'm trying to say. I think this show probably takes place in a week, 2 weeks tops. And then next, Coach talks to her about basketball. There's a goal at the salvage yard. They just hoop it up. So something interesting about the goal is, one, it's a bus with a car on top of it, and the goal is mounted to the car on top of the bus to give it the 10 feet. But Tazba Chavez wrote in an episode on Resident Alien. And the episode that she wrote takes place on a res briefly, and there's a basketball goal in it. And it's got Eugene Braverock in it, and I think it was cool that, it's no secret that she loves basketball, but, ball is life, bro. 2 of the episodes that she's written in television have both featured basketball. I just think that's a cool, trivia thing, cool tidbit. But, Coach tosses to Elora the ball. She makes it. She's like, it's in my blood. And Coach is like, yeah, your mom could shoot too. I got to say, you're a lot alike. And then he goes into talking about her mom and and then Elora asks, can you give me some particulars about my mom, and specifically her passing? Because we knew that like Uncle Brownie wouldn't give any information. And Coach is just like, oh shit, you don't know anything, do you? You don't know anything other than it was a wreck. And Coach knew her from back in the day, and they sounds like they were really close friends. The day of Cookie passing, they were all partying. Sounds like Uncle Brownie was there too, and it makes sense why Uncle Brownie doesn't want to talk about her, because he tried to stop Cookie's boyfriend, who was Rodney. We had no idea who Rodney is, but Rodney was Cookie's boyfriend at the time, and they were in the wreck together. And Rodney and Uncle Brownie had gotten into this massive tussle, in the house, into the street, and because they didn't want him to go driving. They eventually just got in the vehicle. Rodney and Cookie took off, and then they got into a wreck. And I think that's why Uncle Brownie in episode 3 was just like, I can't talk about her because I'm going to end up crying because it hurts too much. Because he tried to stop Rodney from taking off. He potentially could have stopped the wreck from happening had he fought Rodney. And he's always talked about as being a great fighter and someone who could knock out like 30 people in one night, but he couldn't fight Rodney away. He couldn't knock him out to make him stop from getting into the car. And so much of that like depth gets added to Uncle Brownie of like just how much guilt he's carrying and why he basically retreats into the woods and stays there, because he carries that guilt with him. He feels like crap. And all these words get exchanged between Elora and Coach, and you can tell she's about to get emotional. She's trying to process everything. Coach realizes she's about to get emotional, and he breaks the tension. Earlier in the episode, he mentions his nickname, but he's like, okay, Chokaji. She's like, what? He's like, that's what your mom used to call me. Said it meant Great White Warrior or something. Yeah, she used to yell that at me. Chokaji! Chokaji! And this whole time, Elora's like smirking because she knows what it means, but she lets him have the moment. And Coach was great friends with his Elora's mom. And he says, losing friends like that, though, fuck. I mean, there's before they died and after, and just ripples in between. And then we flash back to Elora back in the day. So at this point, she's looking for him. A year prior, she's looking for Daniel. He's not at school, texting Bear. She tried to bring him catfish to his house, nothing. She checks the hideout, finds that he hung himself in his hideout. And she just clutches his ankles and is just paralyzed. You can tell she doesn't know whether to lift him up to try to get him down. He's gone. He's physically there, but he's not there. It's just awful. And can I just say, this is a great, by Devery Jacobs, this is a great, great fucking acting job. My God, that scene was so powerful. And real. Too real, frankly. I'll talk about it in my negatives, but so powerful. Having seen this episode now 4 times, it's every time, even though I know it's coming, it's so powerful. And so flashback to the junkyard. Elora's thinking about Daniel. Coach is thinking about Cookie. They're both crying over lost friends. And I talked to Mark Thielsen, friend of the show, person who was interviewed, all-around badass and poet, Mark Thielsen. He talked about how this episode was powerful for him because it's the plight of Native women that was talked about in episode 4, I believe. In the episode with Bear's mom, when she's like, we're Indian women, we have to hold it down while they go out and play. We got to actually take care of shit while they go out and play. It's the plight of Native women where nobody looks after them. Nobody takes care of them. This whole time, Mark brought this up, and I thought it was a great, great point, is that this whole time, Elora has to be the one to comfort Coach about Cookie. Elora's the one who lost her mom and doesn't know anything about her mom. And this entire show, nobody's ever pulled Elora aside and said like, hey, are you okay? Hey, what can we do for you? Let's take time for you. Tell me your concerns. Let's just cater to what you need. Instead, she's there to help console Coach. And I thank Mark for that observation, because I didn't see that until I watched it again. And I'm just like, no shit, nobody's caring for her. Nobody cares for Elora. She is the leader in that regard. She is the matriarch in that regard, in that The leader is always the last person to get support, the support that they need. And it makes sense why she's just like, F all of this. I'm going to California. I'm done picking up pieces for everybody else. I'm going to worry about myself. And this depth and dimension to this native character is so freaking amazing. And so they're both crying over lost friends. Kenny Boy comes back, fixes the war pony and the rearview mirror. All is good. Elora drops off Coach back at home. And Coach is just like, hey, you saved my ass. You got the tail light fixed. We got to know each other a little more. I'm going to pass you. So she got her license. She can go to California. Before he leaves, though, Elora's just like, she can't let him go without telling him the news, without breaking it to him. She's like, hey, I got to tell you something, Coach. Chokachi, it doesn't mean Great White Warrior. It means toilet. And I love Bill Burr's response. He's like, you know how many people I told that to? You know how many Indians didn't correct me? And he's like, yeah, your mom had a great sense of humor. And that's Indian humor for you. And I think that's where not outsiders like got this like stoic maybe stereotype from, is a native will tell a white person, like a Navajo person will tell you like, oh, your name, your Indian name is Dikius or Chant or Goliji, and those all mean terrible things. Not terrible things, but you would never give that nickname to somebody. Stupid, shit, or skunk. You would never tell anyone, you would never give those names to people. But if a Billagana person came up to me and said, yeah, this Navajo guy told me my Indian name is Goliji, I would not correct him. I'd be like, either that person really didn't like you or they really, really liked you and they don't want to tell you. And so, like, I think Indians, we don't laugh at the same time as like other people. We don't laugh at the same things that other people would. Like a lot of our jokes are so insider that for some people they're like, oh, they're just not funny, or they're like they don't laugh in the same way that we do. They're just stoic Indians. But the person that, and so him saying, you know how many Indians I told that to and didn't correct me, that is amazing. That he went around town probably just proud as hell, like, oh yeah, Great White Warrior, Chokachi. Next level, he probably, he would have went back and asked like, hey, how do you spell Chokachi? I'm going to get that tattooed on my chest, or I'm going to get tattooed on my arm, or I'm going to get someone to, make a leather something and put Chokachi on it. Which he probably did. If this was real life, he probably would have, and I just really enjoy that part. Like, that's such that's an epitome of Indian humor, and you either get it or you don't. And so, basically after this, it's like, good looking out, Post Oak. See you, Chokachi, and then that's it. Fade to black. And then the message appears, which is the most important piece of this episode. If you or someone you know is struggling or in a crisis, help is available. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. Take action for yourself and be there for others. Then it ends. So I'm going to talk about some final thoughts and a personal story before we head out, but let's do some positives. Insider jokes like Chokachi, next level. Fucking A. I love that. That's next level writing that only a native writer's room can do. That humor of maintaining a long-standing joke and basically getting like deadpan reactions from people, or like unenthusiastic reactions from people throughout your life, and be like, yeah, my name's Chokachi, and people laughing at you or grinning at you and being like, what? It means Great White Warrior. Like, yeah, it does, man. Good for you. And another positive that I talked about earlier, you have a show with Bill Burr, Bobby Lee, Kirk Fox. All of these guys bring a following of their own. All of these stand-up comedians have their own like cult-like following, and these guys have a following that they bring to the show, and that's part of the reason why this show has a season 2. I mean, it's amazing to begin with, but you keep bringing in names like this, and you have Bill Burr, Bobby Lee, Kirk Fox going on to other people's podcasts, talking to other comedians, talking to other celebrities, talking about how awesome it is to be on this show, to be working on this set. It can only garner more momentum for a better, bigger next season. And I can't wait. I can't wait for season 2. The writers right now are writing season 2, and I can't wait to see what they come up with. And I'm so excited. I'm looking forward to it. And this is important for us to get when we're trying to get accurate representation, because in the past, when we got accurate representation, it was something that only Indian country could kick around and relish in. It wasn't large enough to get bigger names like Burr and Lee and Fox. We'd have our occasional local heroes be in a movie like Wes Studi and Gary Farmer, but if it were any bigger, it was a non-native production with native characters like in it, but it was driven by non-natives like Magnificent Seven with Martin Sensmeyer, Last of the Mohicans when you had Wes Studi, even Lily Gladstone in the upcoming Killers of the Flower Moon. I mean, it's still a non-native driving the show. And then the news just came out, Prey, the new Predator movie with Amber Midthunder, another example where it's a non-native driving the show with natives in it. And I think hopefully this will pave the way for, like, you know what? When you give natives control of the narrative and you give natives the helm of a show, you put them at the helm and you let them drive the show, they can actually come up with some great stuff, because these are stories that really that the greater audience has not seen or been exposed to, because we've been repressed. Our stories haven't been allowed to be told at this level. And I'm so excited to keep seeing more content like this. Can't wait for season 2. Another example, frankly, is Rutherford Falls. You have a show run by natives with natives in it, but Ed Helms is the draw, frankly, for a lot of people. It sucks that Peacock is another paywall that people have to pay for, but Rutherford Falls is an example where it's like almost the middle ground between how it was traditionally, where natives are just a showpiece, where they're a piece on a larger narrative that's non-native, driven by non-native people, and Rutherford Falls is kind of the middle ground, and then the pinnacle is Reservation Dogs. So let's go negatives. Trigger warning wasn't large enough, I think. Me personally, being that suicide is such a big issue in our communities and so many native viewers showed up for this show, this particular episode was a lot. So many natives showed up for this show, and this episode depicted a lot what we already know, and frankly what we go through far too often. I've mentioned the suicide rates across the board are higher in Indian country than almost in every age demographic. Particularly among youth, the suicide rate is higher than the national average. And it's not negative. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, it's good that you're talking about it, because this is what accurate representation looks like, unfortunately, in our communities. But I think I would have liked something of like, brace yourself, take the necessary actions to care for yourself. There's a lot that's going to be shown here. And this isn't a like, hey, suck it up, snowflake kind of situation either. Like that statement does not apply in this. Sometimes it would be like, okay, you just gotta buck up. This is real life. It's like, no. This shit's too real for us natives. Like, it's an epidemic in our communities. Before the pandemic, before COVID-19, we had suicide and drug addiction. And youth suicide is a massive, massive problem, highlighted by the movie The Grizzlies. Go out and see the movie The Grizzlies if you've never seen it, about the lacrosse team up in Nunavut. Definitely go check that movie out, because that's another great movie that shows how powerful wasn't the right word I wanted to use, but how unfortunately prevalent suicide is in our communities. So, final thoughts. If you don't want to hear a personal story about me, I would just turn off for the rest of this episode. But I'm pretty much done talking about Res Dogs. But I wouldn't be doing my duty talking about an episode on suicide if I didn't share a little bit of my story. And frankly, I only share this because of how close I was to the edge. And I've lost too many friends in the recent years. Too many close friends in recent years to suicide. And even if this episode of mine helps only one person or helps someone start a conversation, then these last 10 minutes of this episode are worth it. So in 2010, I graduated from Dartmouth. Top of the world, go back to my town. I was toast of the town for a bit. I was in the Navajo Times as lauded as like, hey, look at this Navajo kid. We sent him off 4 years ago, Chief Manuelito Scholar. He was doing great. Came back. I couldn't find a job to save my life. I moved back in with my family. 2010, we were trying to recover from the housing market. In 2008, the crash. and we were in a recession. At this time, my mental state was awful. You know, I was having violent panic attacks daily already when I had left college. And coming back to the res, coming back to a place where I didn't have that same support system I had in college, that same level of discourse I was enjoying that could help me escape from my mental state. And my violent panic attacks were like, I felt like my tongue would swell to twice its size. And I was on the verge of choking all the time. You know, I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. I was so skinny. I was losing weight at a violent rate. I was malnourished. You know, doctors would tell me I'm healthy. Oh, your blood work's normal, your thyroid's normal, everything's fine, you know. And as I couldn't find a job, you know, my bills would pile up. My grace period was coming due on my student loans. My younger brothers who looked up to me, who were still living at home, were like, you know, what are you doing with your life kind of thing, you know? I fought with my dad a lot over like not getting a job because when you're fighting anxiety and battling depression like that, you don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to go do shit. But then I was living at home. I had to do shit. I had to look for a job. And when I wasn't, anytime my dad saw me laying down, sitting down, not doing something, because he was covering for me, you know, him and my mom were helping cover my bills. We would just get into fights, like big fights. You know, it's like the joy of graduating from an Ivy League institution was over. Nobody gave a shit anymore. If anything, they held it against me of like, what are you doing, Dartmouth? Like fucking living with your parents, being at home. I was in a dark place. I had like constant suicidal thoughts. And thankfully I had my mother who was able to, like, if it wasn't for my mom, I don't know what would have happened, honestly. I confided in her. I truly believe my mother saved my life because she empathized with my pain. She was the only person in that trailer that I lived in, where there was like 10 of us, that just got it. That took the time as my mom to say, I know something's wrong. I just don't know what it is. She didn't understand it, but she saw my panic attacks and saw the terror in her baby's eyes and was just like, I don't know what's happening, but I just want to help. You're not eating, you're not drinking, like, you're not getting a job. Like, what is wrong? This isn't my baby. She took the time to care for me. She nursed me back to health, where I could find a job finally. And things finally started trending in the right direction. I got health insurance. I got a job that I got health insurance because before I didn't. I was able to go to a non-res, non-IHS doctor, and things improved slowly but surely. And I still battle with some of those things today. I still battle with panic attacks periodically, but finding my purpose again and finding help and getting help, and my wife helping so much, and my wife being that support system, and my wife like being my everything and being my best friend really helped turn things around. And I don't mean to end this episode on a downer, but I bring all this up to say, like, it happens to everybody at some point. If you're experiencing anything where you think you're less than, or wonder if things, or wonder at worst, you know, things would be a lot better if I wasn't around. I've been there a lot. And do your best to understand it's okay to have those thoughts. You know, thinking about getting someone, think about getting help. Preferably someone who can help, someone who's a professional. You know, the number that was mentioned earlier, the National Suicide Lifeline, call that number. You know, we all go through shit. Sometimes our mind is locked in a place where we can't get out by ourselves, and it's okay to admit that. Most times we can get out on our own, but sometimes we need help, you know. We need help to lift us up sometimes. Please get help. If you need it, ask for it. Even if you don't know what help looks like, just ask someone. So, like, I don't know what help looks like right now, but this is what I'm going through. Somebody help me. I shared my story just to say it's not just you. You know, you're not broken. You just need some help. Talk to somebody. So that's it. This is one of my favorite episodes I've ever seen in television because of its real shit that we go through. This is what accurate representation looks like. Unfortunately, even when it hurts, it feels good to see this on screen. Someone hopefully, honestly, can be helped by this show. Somebody hopefully calls that number if they need help. You know, that's why Logic made a song about suicide, because it needs to be talked about. Too often in Indian country, I think for people that don't know, specifically Navajos, I'm not going to broad brush this one, we associate these kind of conversations with like, like ghosts, like talking about the dead. Like culturally, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to let them go on to the next world. We're supposed to like let their spirit go. We don't visit the body. We don't visit the grave. We don't talk about them. We try not to think about them too much. Like, it's almost like taboo to do those things. So it becomes increasingly difficult when you're dealing with a modern day problem, suicide, and you can't talk about it. It's almost taboo to not talk about it. It becomes this dangerous recipe for rampant suicide. And along with poor access to adequate mental health services and the stigmas that exist in lower SES, lower socioeconomic status communities around mental health, all of that is ripe for what we see right now in Indian country. So thank you, Res Dogs, like for bringing this to our attention, bringing this to the attention of people that don't know, that aren't from these communities, that aren't on these, like, that don't have these struggles. And even though it was difficult to see and difficult to watch, fuck, it was a great episode. So keep up the great work, Reservation Dogs. Sterling Harjo, thank you for this episode. Thank you for this show. And this episode, like I said, hit hard for me because of, my experiences with struggling with those kind of thoughts, but also the people that I've lost recently. I lost 3 close friends in the past 3 years to suicide. So shout out to Wilbert, shout out to Seth, shout out to Tyson. I miss you, brothers. Until we meet again. All right, everybody. I'm going to be working on the last episode of the show, and then we can move on. Then, move on. Wait for season 2. I can't wait for it. But, all right, everybody. Talk to you later.